to our sermon series and see what we're taking beyond Sunday. My name is Dina Newsom, and I am ecstatic to have some guests that I haven't seen for a couple weeks now. Go ahead, introduce yourselves.
I'm Julie Easley. I'm the Executive Director at King of Kings.
I'm Roger Timer, one of the pastors.
It's so nice to have you here. So at King of Kings, as a church, we just finished 2 weeks of VBS, and all three of us have been in kids ministry early on in our church careers.
So true.
So I'm sure plenty of VBS experience. So my question for you is, what is one of your favorite VBS memories?
I think probably for me, both as a child going to VBS and then as an adult participating in VBS, is just watching the kids sing with their whole hearts and do the actions and just be so into praising God. And I remember loving that when I was a kid too. Just a lot of joy there.
I also have the picture of the group energy. And from their perspective, it was one of the most celebrated rock concert
It's true.
live events of their life. Yes, it's the real deal. And it's all getting a focus towards Jesus. And their hearts are so open for it. But my favorite moments are all the crazy stunts that happen because I got to be part of
did
those.
a lot of them. I hear stories.
Yeah.
I wonder how many gallons of sweat you've poured into various costumes over the years. It's horrible to think about.
Stupid thing. I can tell you. But we got more important things. I'm going to put on my maturity hat. More important things than me telling you stories.
I don't know. I kind of like the stories.
Oh.
You guys talk about the energy like in the room. My favorite memory is one year there was a little boy who was the third grader, and in one of the stations they said something like, you can read more about this story in your Bible at home. Like you can check that out. And this little boy went to the leader and said, I don't have a Bible at home. And so the leader came to me and said, hey, can we get this child a Bible? And I'm like, absolutely. Go and get a Bible, take it to him. It's closing. Kids are jumping, hopping around. The music is going. Everyone in the room, like that year, I think we had, 400 kids in the room. And this little boy sat down and opened that Bible amidst all the craziness and just started looking through it.
Oh, I love
And
it.
I took out my phone and
love
took a picture because that was just like,
Wanna remember
oh my
it
gosh,
forever.
the power of the Word of God.
Yes.
Here he was asked for it. And
That's so great.
yeah.
And the power of the community.
Yes.
We do not grow in our faith as a solo sport.
Right.
And VBS really emphasizes that. It gives time for kids to be part of a group and hear other kids and their faith stories as the shepherd or the little guide takes them along. And just the whole community that happens in such a short span of time reminds us as a church, hey, we need each other.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that's very intergenerational, which we're kind of talking about in our
Let's
sermon
go.
series. And you talked, Julie, about how you have memories when you were growing up. There's so many of our volunteers now that grew up with VBS. And so they continue to come back and pour into the kids. And
That's so great.
Well, jumping into that intergenerational idea, this week was week 4 of our Honor Code series, and it was talking about different generations. What stuck out to you guys? What are you taking beyond Sunday from this message?
Well, I really appreciate an overview of generational thinking. It's easy for us to think of our biases and differences in terms of cultural lines, geographic language, those kinds of divisions. But more subtle are some of the age divisions. And in the recent age, I might say generational groupings, because that has become a science. It's last about 30 years.
Back from the book Strauss and Howell, Generations to Generations, which they made me read during my doctoral studies. I'm so smart on this stuff.
But it is fascinating. And as we do that, we do it with a purpose, going back to words that they use, to exegete the culture so we can better understand how to love one another and, in this case, honor. from generation to generation.
I think when I got done listening to that message, I was just reminded again about the incredible power of the words that you speak. And it costs just as much to say something encouraging as to say something discouraging. And everyone can use encouragement. And how are we using our words to encourage? I mean, speaking as someone now who's in an older generation, how am I using my words to encourage and empower the generations coming behind me? It costs nothing but time, and it can make such a difference in young adults' lives.
Yes, very true. That's really what my brain was just swimming with. Oh gosh, how big of an impact do we have? And I'm somebody that's worked in kids ministry, has worked in student ministry. Like, I try to recruit and cheer on other adults to pour into these, but it's very easy in my day-to-day life to forget how I, just as one individual, impacts, people. Yeah.
It's good.
All right. So Pastor Zach Zender started out this message with a little breakdown of the different generations. So my question is, what generation are you from? And what stereotypical trait of that generation do you like about your group?
So I'm from Gen X, and I think Gen X always prides ourselves in being like one of the more low maintenance generations. So now here I go. I'm going to say something that's not particularly positive, but I feel like it kind of like the boomers just got a lot of attention. And I felt like millennials got a lot of attention. And I think Gen X actually is a smaller, like the window to be a Gen X is smaller, but just kind of got skipped over. But I feel like overall, we're kind of that generation that puts their nose to the grindstone and just gets the job done. But maybe everybody feels that way.
No, I think you hit it. Actually, one of the things, we didn't talk about that, but I found fascinating in taking some graduate level courses in generational thinking is that at any one time, there's a constellation of 4 generations, and they go dominant, recessive, dominant, recessive.
There you go.
And you can see that happening with the boomers, the millennials, the Xers.
Yes, or the recessive.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that you're less than, but they don't get quite the attention.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We had to watch movies that actually reflected the generation. And the movie that we watched for the Generation X was a Ted...
Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Oh, that was one of them, but there's another one.
The Breakfast Club.
That's what I was just going to say.
okay.
The Breakfast Club. Any John Hughes movie.
Why didn't I
feel like that's very our generation.
Yeah, it's going to come to me.
It will.
When it does, you just
shout
pipe
it
up.
out.
Our listeners want to know.
Be like, woo, woo.
I'm laughing about it right now. But anyway, yeah, I think you're right there. And I'm a boomer, and we were a very idealistic generation.
Yes.
And I appreciate that because I was there in the 60s and the summer of love and during my teenage years and all the idealism and the counterculture. But actually, such a dominant sized group.
Yes.
The whole society of America began to idealize what we were idealizing. Now, we had a tendency to be very idealistic, but in terms of like getting everything done, that was irrelevant. Everyone just kind of had to pander to us a little bit.
Okay,
no,
boomer.
we did get stuff done.
You did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were high perform.
A lot of boomer presidents. No
Yes.
Gen X presidents.
No, because it's a population thing too.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yeah.
I'm a Gen Xer, and I love the survivability that Gen Xers have. We're like, we didn't wear sunscreen, and we didn't use car seats, and we drank from hoses, and we survived.
That's it.
We would leave the house, and we didn't get kidnapped, and
Yes.
like, we'd be gone all day, and nobody knew where we were.
Free range those kids.
Yes. And it was just, we survived.
So true.
That's what I like. So as Zach transitioned into the next part of his message, he talked about he had two things that were tips for the older generation to think about when they're communicating with the younger generation, and then two tips for the younger generation speaking to the older generation. So the first ones were from older to younger. And the first one he said, this is all the P's in his sentence, push past preferences to propel the next generation. And he asked the question, what preference is God calling you to lay aside in order to greater propel those younger than you? What are your thoughts on that idea of pushing past the preferences to propel the next generation, or what is God asking you to set aside?
Well, one of the common characteristics as a follower of Jesus is to be not just to know him, but to be inhabited by him and his attitude towards people, which had the capacity to understand. And by understanding people, it gives opportunity to know what is it that they might need. Now, encouraging words is an excellent example of that. But in some cases, it might be even more specifically like validation. And there might be people in generational profiles that are beneath you or not younger than you, that simply need the validation that, hey, you got what it takes. Now, that's also a quote that's been widely said. Fathers need to say that to the next generation after them, particularly their sons, and say, you got what it takes.
Yeah. I think about when the prophet Samuel was talking to God about who the next king of Israel is going to be. And God reminded him, I don't look at people the way that you look at people. Man looks at the outside, God looks at the heart. And I think sometimes when we look at people of a different generation and don't maybe understand what the wrapping on the gift is all about, the gift is still in there. And we really need to take the time to kind of maybe look beyond the things that puzzle us to the heart of the person inside of that. And so I'm just thinking a lot about how do I really look at the heart of a person. And sometimes I think these generational differences, there's just some fear attached to it. So even, I'm 55 and there's stuff I don't understand about technology and it just feels intimidating to me. And when things seem scary or different, there's just a tendency to push against it a little bit.
Yes.
So I'm trying to recognize in myself when I see something that's unfamiliar, not to push against it, but to be curious and to move forward.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Simon Sinek, the author and speaker. I love a lot of what he talks about, but he talks a lot about the millennial generation as they got into the workforce. And both boomers and Gen Xers would judge millennial coworkers of, they're lazy. They don't want to work their full 40 hours, and they just have a different work style. They just function in a different way. They grew up with different routines. And so they function and structure their day and their work time in different ways than what a boomer or a Gen X or just someone different than them may do. And I really would almost get angry in some of the podcasts I would hear him in, talking about millennials are not lazy. The idea is that they're lazy, and they're not lazy. They just work differently. They function differently.
Dina, that's such a very good illustration. And if I were to put myself back a few years, back when I had hair down to my shoulders, and it was a statement of being countercultural, and the generation above me said, you long-haired
Yippee.
yeah. And it was one of those social customs that was becoming a barrier that you just used to characterize, stereotype, if you would, that generation behind you. And that's what Zach's talking about. Let's push aside. Let's understand what some of those biases are so that we can answer the calling that God's given us to speak into other people's lives the honor that God wants to give them through us.
Yes. So the second point that he talked about for the older generation to the younger generation is to speak life and courage. What are your thoughts there? You've already kind of touched base on, speaking positively to them. It's not just words, it's actions too. That's what I kept thinking. It's not just words, it's actions. It's how I make assumptions about that generation. And then how do I build them up even when I may not fully understand their motives in the same way that my brain works
I think one of the things that struck me in the message was just talking about the challenges that our younger generations face, things that are unique to them that we never experienced, or maybe experienced in a different way. Every generation has their challenges, I know. But I think like about my youngest son who was born a few months after 9/11 and then graduated from high school during the COVID epidemic. That's really tough. And growing up requires courage. And how awesome is it when you have someone who comes alongside you and says, like you said, Roger, you've got what it takes, or I'm walking with you. And then don't just say it, but actually take time, which is really our most precious commodity. I think during the message, I was thinking about, Julie, what are more intentional ways that you could reach out to the generations beneath you?
Yeah. By the way, I really do appreciate what you said, Julie, about the fact that the generational characteristics, personalities are largely formed by some of those sociological events happening, in the era of their formative years or developing years, whatever. So it helps us better understand. And sometimes to be able to speak honor into their lives means to validate them in ways that we can help step aside and make a path of success for them. Now, one of the things that I really enjoy doing is I hire a young man from our church to come on over and help me with various yard work or different building projects and stuff like that. And it gives me a chance to actually coach him a little bit about work and hard work. And also even to the point of saying, okay, let's look at what you've just done there. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
And he'll say, yeah. And I go, no, it's not. I'm going to tell you why.
And actually, that is a kind of a loving thing.
It's a loving thing. I said, because you're going to have, someday a boss, and someday you're going to own your own company. And if that happens, you're not going to get that customer back. And here's why. And also, then we would joke about it, laugh about it. But what he got the clear picture, and what he needed to know is that someone is genuinely on his team and wants to see him have success and is willing to, for me, not to do it all myself.
Right.
But to take the time to let him do so that he can have success and help him fashion that.
Yeah. And mentoring really is a gift. And that's what you're doing.
Yeah. And I'm also getting very cheap labor. Don't tell him. Well, no, I'm paying him okay.
But you are investing in him. And that's something I think that we have kind of lost sight of in society. I feel like when I grew up, there were a lot of adults that I feel like poured into me. They were the neighbors in my neighborhood, or leaders at my church, or even different relationships that I had with adults at at school. And I feel like sometimes now there's such a barrier to just investing in other people's children. Both of my daughters, when they were young, when they were in their teenage years, had their small group leader at church that really just poured into them. And still to this day, one of them, she was there for a time and then she kind of grew out of it and that was fine. She has
Sure.
fond memories. But my middle daughter just reached out to hers yesterday
Wow.
to talk about life, and we were just talking 27. So this was 10 years ago or more than that they were spending time together, but the impact that
Wow.
that had. And the amazing thing about it is now that daughter has developed a relationship with some teenagers that she knows just kind of through a circumstance that are foster children right now. And she is just pouring into those kids. She'll take those kids just out for a meal or just go spend time with those kids where she's just an outside adult. Like
Yeah.
they have enough adults advocating for them, trying to help them with the situation that they find themselves in. But this is just somebody coming and loving on them and spending time in them. And like purposefully, she said, I remember what that meant to me, even though she wasn't in the same personal situation and is now trying to turn around and pay it back to someone else.
Wow.
So it's an interesting question if we kind of took Zach's encouraging word and said, who is it that we would identify in our sphere of influence and be intentional about opening up opportunities to develop a more intentional kind of relationship or mentoring? And Julie, I've watched you do that because you've done that with some younger gals in a very intentional way that also brought spiritual breakthrough.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just a blessing both ways, right? So just being able to hear their perspectives, seeing them as they're coming to understand new things about God, just enjoying who God made them to be as a person. That's been it. It's been extremely meaningful for me. So I've been grateful for those opportunities.
Now, Julie, did you ever participate in MomCo?
I
what
did
used to be
not.
MOPS. I did not either. And so this is something I'm still learning about. But MomCo sets up basically like mom mentors with their program where it's moms that have been through your stage that help mentor younger moms,
that.
through that. And that's an organization right here that we work with in our building, that uses our facilities that is honoring the next generation or a generation younger than them, not necessarily the next generation like children, but a generation younger than them by trying to support, encourage, by speaking life and courage, just like Zach's, challenge. So
That's great.
All right. So then Pastor Zach transitioned into advice for the younger generation in relationship to the older generation. And his opening advice was stop wasting your money on DoorDash.
I loved it. I wouldn't stand up and say, oh, it's obvious.
So true.
I do think that's a very generational thing.
Yes. 100%.
No, his real advice, number one, was receive their wisdom. What did that make you think of?
Well, our culture sometimes does not, and we have to understand our American culture has though it's a fabric of many different nationalities blended, has its own unique take on elderly. Because some cultures around the world, the older you get, the wiser you get, and the more prominent your voice becomes. Perhaps not so in America. It's not as readily seen. There's a kind of a tipping point after which the person, and the person may not be perceived to be as wise. But the point is, true wisdom is being open to receiving wisdom. And can we take the time to actually, in reverse, ask that question that I mentioned earlier? Who is it that you're identifying and being intentional with to pour into? Well, if we were to reverse it, who are you identifying or being intentional to say, I think I need to slow life down a little bit and ask that person some things about life that they have to share with me that might be really beneficial.
I love that, Roger. I was thinking about something similar. So I just heard this on a podcast, and I can't say who the person, I can't remember who the person was exactly, but he was saying how important it is from us to move from kind of looking at people who have platforms to people who are pillars. And he said, oftentimes people who are pillars in their community have lived a long life of faithfulness to God, to other people, and they actually may not be people who are shouting from the rooftops, hey, look at me, look at me. But I think the younger generation would be wise to slow down and look at people who've lived really fruitful lives in relationship to God and other people over a long period of time, and be inquisitive and ask them about what that's been like. And they would just learn so much. So I just think it's slowing down and asking questions of people who might not be saying, hey, let me tell you all about myself. I've got this amazing platform. Here's what you need to know. It's looking for those quieter people who are just absolutely rock solid.
Can I share a little bit about being old?
Yes.
I got you.
Older.
No.
What
Okay.
I know,
exactly?
right?
Older.
Age challenged or what?
No.
Chronologically
Yeah.
challenged. Yeah.
No, chronologically superior.
There
There
you
we
go.
go.
That's
That was
right.
the word.
That's
I
right.
found it too.
Yes, you are correct.
Yeah, so I'm chronologically superior, but I have found that in my more recent chronologically superiority years, I am much more reticent not to talk or share my perspective as I was 20 years ago. I find it much more helpful for other people if I just am quiet unless they are really interested or really ask. And so that's kind of a word of encouragement that sometimes we really need to ask. And here's a classic point. I had just an amazing encounter recently in Africa with a refugee people group face to face with 1,000 refugees. And it's an amazing story. And someone asked me a little bit about it. And I told a paragraph. And then I kind of watched the person switch the topic to something else. And I said, well, that's okay. But because I don't have a need to keep going like maybe I once would have. But I'm wondering if maybe that person might have asked a little bit more, because there were some things that they might have really benefited from.
Yeah. So then Zach said number 2 was expressing your gratitude and grace. That's from the younger generation to the older generation. This is one I think that is easy to forget. I mean, we talk about how much the boomers did, or how much my parents did, or, whatever my parents, whatever generation they may be, as kids grow up and learn, they've done this for our family, or they sacrificed this, or they did this for our community or for our church. And I think it's real easy to forget to thank them for that. And it takes such little time. But don't you think it means so much?
I mean, right, we were talking about how much encouragement means. Gratitude means a lot too. Speaking as a mom, all right, say no more, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. He talked about kind of the transfer of generational wealth. Well, there's a lot of ways to be wealthy. And so just to encourage people, even if you don't have like a lot of cash to pass on to your children someday, you can pass on something that's just of so much more value, right? Discipling your children in the Lord, that's going to pay eternal benefits that go far beyond whatever money that you may give to them. Just the richness of a healthy and happy family life, parent-child relationship. So just being grateful for what you've received. Nothing's perfect, but I think a lot of us can say we had parents who at least some of the time did well and wanted what was best for us. And can we find that and say thank you?
I recently had the blessing, the challenge, the life transition of helping my father-in-law go into the nursing home. And a big part of that with my wife, Cheryl, and I, in our conversations with him, was taking time, for me especially, to affirm him for his personal impact to me. Because these are the crowning years of his life. Yeah. And to remind him that some of his personality characteristics of speaking joy into people's lives, so that just being interested in people, and those kinds of things that gave him a sense of people feeling connected to him when he was around. He needed to hear that again when he was going to the next transition, that just like you've done for me, Dad, in so many ways, I see now the Lord's calling you to a new ministry to the people in the nursing home. Yeah. And it was not only affirming and in a way just to say thank you, but also it propels us to kind of see what God's up to, because when we're thankful, we're usually celebrating something that God's doing or has done.
This piece made me think of 2 weeks ago when it was Father's Day, and Pastor Greg was talking about doing a special prayer for fathers, and he had all the dads stand up and ask people to go, lay a hand on their father. My son, who's 18 and just graduated high school, was in the service that day, and he said that near him there was an older, he didn't say how old, how chronologically superior, but an older gentleman who stood up, and he didn't have any family around him, but he stood up as a father. Oh. And my son went over and put hands and prayed on him. And he said when he finished, this guy was tearing up and turned to him and said, "Thank you." And we were talking about it afterwards. And I was like, what an amazing way to honor that generation for you. Like, he knows for whatever reason, his family is not here, whether they don't live here, they don't come to church with him. When he stood up, he knew that wasn't going to be that case. He's still receiving a prayer because we're praying over all the fathers in the room. You know what I mean? Right. But just to have this stranger come over who's a younger generation, that I'm sure there are a lot of stereotypes about, prayer and where their faith life is, and just the boldness to go over and step that up. And he's telling me this story, and I'm tearing up talking about it now. Like, I'm just like,
oh yeah, it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Love it.
But I just really thought that was I kept thinking of that this week when Zach was talking about, honoring that generation. And I was like, oh, you know what? Not all hope is lost.
Yes.
That's so sweet, Dina.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah, I think, just thinking about this message and the scripture verse that says life and death is in the tongue. How are we using our words? Are we sharing life, or are we bringing something way worse? And man, when I think about the words that I speak, I want to be representing Jesus himself, who was full of life. And it was just a great reminder.
So I think we're probably to that point where you're kind of wrapping up.
We are.
I'm getting the wrap up look from Dina. It's just always you're always so kind anyway.
This is a job you can transition into, Roger.
I love the topic of honor. And it kind of caused me to ask the question, God, what are you asking? And in the very heart of the commandment to love God is to honor him. And the way we honor God, the way we love God, is by loving others and honoring others. That's just kind of how it works. And the beautiful thing about the Christian faith is that the power to do that comes from God seeing how faulted and short we come up, and taking action himself because he was the one that took his robe of honor, laid it aside, came and took up a clothing of shame of our own sin and took it on himself and then was ridiculed. Jesus ridiculed as he bore our shame on himself. Why? So that we might be honored with his forgiveness and life in him. And after we received that from a God that would honor us so much, my goodness, there's power in that, how we can honor one another across generations, up generations, down generations, across backyard fences, national boundaries, or language boundaries. So what a blessing it is to be an honor culture, because God's the one who honored us so.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this series. And I wrote down the quote that Pastor Zach shared towards the end of this message. And it was from Sadie Robertson Huff. And it says, "When we are a generation that honors, encourages, and lifts each other up, old and young, we don't just carry the gospel, we multiply it." I was like, whoa, that one's good. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for being here. I am excited for your next visit, whenever it is on our schedule, because we'll be jumping into a new sermon message next week.
Sounds great.
All right.